Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 5, Flexible Single Master Operations Roles in benandbrady.com domain. In this video, you will learn to determine the appropriate domain modes. You will learn that there are two domain modes, and we will finally upgrade our domain to the highest mode possible. Then you will learn about the flexible single master operations roles. We will verify what roles we currently have. Then we will transfer the roles, and last but not the least, if needed, we will also seize the operations master role. So these topics are very theoretical. Let me explain to you exactly why this topic is important from a practical standpoint, and that is also the reason why Microsoft asks a lot of a lot of questions in the MCSE exams on these topics. So let's look at our network diagram one more time and determine what these roles are and how they are important to us. To begin with, we have three domain controllers, two of these in the California site and one in the North Carolina site. Since we have Windows 2000 servers installed on these computers, we started with a clean slate. In other words, we built up a new domain for benandbrady.com using Windows 2000. However, a lot of companies already had Windows NT servers before Windows 2000 server came out. So in their cases, they would be upgrading their existing domains from Windows NT to Windows 2000. Now, Windows 2000 has a lot of neat and cool features such as Active Directory that was not present in Windows NT. So one of the biggest challenges for Microsoft or any company that makes a radically different product such as Server 2000 is to make sure that it is backward compatible with the existing products that they have sold in the past. So in other words, to make Windows 2000 backward compatible with Windows NT, so that if you have Windows NT, you can upgrade your existing domains systematically. You would upgrade your existing servers systematically so that once all the servers are upgraded to Windows 2000, then you can turn on some of the features for Windows 2000 that was not there before. That is the idea behind creating what are known as different modes. There are actually two modes in Windows 2000. So let me take you to my notes over here. The first mode is what is known as the Windows 2000 mixed mode, and the second mode is what is known as the Windows 2000 native mode. In the mixed mode, what you are assuming is that you still have Windows NT domain controllers running in your domain, so that you need backward compatibility with them. So in the mixed mode, you can run Windows NT domains, Windows 2000 domains, as well as, since Windows 2003 server also came out, you can also run Windows 2003 domains. If you're taking the MCSE exams, the word Windows to Server 2003 may be missing simply because when these exams were written, Windows Server 2003 does not exist. But now that it is out, we know that in the Windows 2000 mixed mode, you can support basically all different types of operating systems. That includes Windows NT, Windows 2000, and Windows Server 2003. In other words, if you have domain controllers using any of these operating systems, Windows 2000 can coexist with them. Let me show you exactly what I mean by this. Let us assume that the domain benandbrady.com already existed in the Windows NT format. So let's say that DC1, DC2, and DC3 are all Windows NT domain controllers, and now the company has decided to upgrade to Windows 2000 servers. So this is what happened. You came in as a consultant, and on the first domain controller, DC1, you upgraded this particular domain controller, which was, by the way, the PDC, or the primary domain controller in the Windows NT environment, to Windows Server 2000. So once again, in Windows NT, you had the PDC as DC1, and DC2 and DC3 were what are known as backup domain controllers, which we today call the additional domain controllers. There is one major difference between the way Windows 2000 servers work and the way Windows NT worked. In Windows NT, the PDC was a read-write copy of the domain database. DC2 and DC3 would be the BDCs, or backup domain controllers, and they would depend on DC1 for one-way replication from DC1 to DC2 and DC3 to update their domains. In other words, you could not walk up to DC2 and actually create a user account. Even if you could, it's actually written to DC1 and not to DC2 itself. In other words, DC1 was the only read-write copy of the domain database. DC2 and DC3 were read-only copies. So replication went one way from DC1 to DC2 and from DC1 to DC3. So the first task would then be to upgrade Windows 2000, to upgrade Windows NT PDC, or the primary domain controller, to Windows 2000 server. So let's say you've done that. DC1 is now Windows 2000 server, DC2 is the BDC of NT, and DC3 is the BDC of NT as well. Now here's the issue. DC2 and DC3 are BDCs. They need to see a Windows NT PDC for them to actually replicate with each other. So what DC2 and DC3 did was they saw DC1 as a PDC because it plays the role what is known as a PDC emulator, and they got the domain database from it. In other words, your domain had to be working in an environment where it supported Windows NT BDCs. Otherwise, replication would never take place, and you would have an issue where DC2 and DC3 are basically non-functional at this point. So to avoid all these problems, what Microsoft did was created two domains or two types of domain modes. One is known as the mixed mode, in which the Windows 2000 server will act as a PDC to Windows NT BDC backup domain controllers, and replication would still exist. Now, the only problem with this mode is that if you leave server 2000 in this mode, there are some features that are disabled. I'm going to show you exactly what those features are. So what you need to do is you need to upgrade the existing NT domain controllers, and once all the domain controllers are Windows 2000, you should upgrade the mode to Windows 2000 native mode. In this Windows 2000 native mode, the domain can have any Windows 2000 servers as well as Windows 2003 servers. So you have to raise the functional level. Now, what difference does it make? Let me just show you exactly what I mean by that. Let's make our connection to DC1. Just to show you a couple of examples where it is necessary to upgrade the domain from mixed mode to native mode. So I'm going to go to Active Directory Users and Computers. And over here, let's first check out a mode. So I'm going to select benandbrady.com, right click, and then go to Properties over here. And you can see that we are in what is known as the mixed mode. Okay, so currently we are in the mixed mode, and in this mixed mode, the following happens. What I'm going to do is make sure that my advanced features are turned on. They are. Now, let me try to create a universal group. Those of you familiar with Windows 2000 and Server 2003 know that a universal group is a new group that came out in Windows 2000 Server and is also present in Windows 2003 Server, that basically took out any restriction of putting any user or any group into that particular universal group. In other words, the user or the group can be in any domain in the entire forest, and you can insert it in the universal group. Universal group resides in the global catalog, and when the user logs in, the global catalog must be available. So universal group is a great way of assigning group membership and then permissions to any user in any domain in the entire forest. Now, this is new in Windows 2000 Server, and if I were to create a universal group over here by right-clicking on any OU, I'm going to right-click on the California OU and then go to New, Group, and then I'm trying to create a new universal group for security distribution. I'm sorry, for security, I'm creating a new group called the universal group. As you can see, universal is not available to me. It is grayed out simply because I'm in the mixed mode. Okay, once we are in the native mode, you will see that universal groups will be available. So that was just one example. Let me show you another example. And this example is widely used in remote access services, also known as RAS. So I'm going to go to the administrator's user account and then go to the properties of that. You could have gone to anybody's user account. I just chose administrator as the example over here. And then over here, I'm going to go to the dial-in tab. Now, in the dial-in tab, there are two basic permissions that I can give to this user for dial-in or VPN into my local network. So this is the case where the user, the administrator, is out of the office and would like to dial in or access the local area network through VPN. Now, there are just two permissions, but by default it is deny. That means this person is not allowed access. I can either say allow or say deny. This was the case in Windows NT, where you could simply allow or deny access. In Windows 2000 Server and in Server 2003, there is a new way of allowing access that known as control access through remote access policy. In other words, you can actually set up a policy that will say that, you know what, I'm going to allow you access or deny you access, not simply by using a simple switch over here. It will also depend on other factors such as what time of the day are you dialing in, which group do you belong to, what speed of connection do you currently have, and so forth. Okay, so that feature is unavailable. Also, the feature to verify the caller ID when the user calls in is unavailable, as are some other features over here. So these are some of the features that are available only when you upgrade the domain to upgrade it from the mixed mode to the native mode. Now, how do you do that? Let's check that out. You can do it from Active Directory Users and Computers. You can also do it from Active Directory Domains and Trust. So we're going to do that. I'm going to select a new tool that we have not used so far in this video series, Active Directory Domains and Trust, and this happens to be the official answer and Microsoft certification tests as well. This tool controls all the domains in the entire forest, and basically you can set up trust relationships over from this tool. So what I'm going to do is select benandbrady.com, right click, go to properties, and now we will upgrade our domain from mixed mode to native mode. As you can see over here, it says that your domain is currently in the mixed mode and it supports both Windows 2000 and pre-Windows 2000 domain controllers. Like I said before, this product came out before Server 2003 came out, but just so that you know, it also supports Windows Server 2003. Now, I need to change the mode. Please remember, this is a one-way process. In other words, once you change the mode from mixed to native, you can never ever go back to the mixed mode. That is why it is extremely important that all the domain controllers in your domain better be running Windows 2000 or a higher operating system before you change the mode to mixed to native mode. What I mean by that is the following, that if DC2 and DC3 are still currently running Windows NT, you must first upgrade DC2 and DC3 to Windows Server 2000 and then change the mode from mixed to native. If you do not do that, you will no longer be supporting these two backup domain controllers. So please be aware of that. And it's a one-way process. Once you change, you cannot actually change back. In fact, you will see that this button actually disappears. So I'm going to click on the change mode button, and it will warn us that this is a one-time deal. After you change, you cannot reset it to mixed mode. I'm going to say yes to it and click on apply, and it's going to successfully replicate to all the domain controllers in the domain. And there we go. I'm in a mixed mode. Click on the OK button. Let's close Active Directory Domains and Trusts and go back to Active Directory Users and Computers. I just want to show it to you another way as well. You could have upgraded it from here as well by selecting the domain, right-clicking, going to Properties, and you see the same screen actually over here too. Okay, but what I wanted to show you is that the button has disappeared. You are in the native mode, and that's about it. You cannot change modes anymore. So I'm going to hit the cancel button and show you exactly the features that were not available before. So let's do the same thing. I'm going to right-click on California and try to create a new universal group. So I'm going to select group over here, and there we go. A security group type of universal is now available, so I can create universal groups. Let's check out our RAS policies. So what I'm going to do is pick up this user administrator, go to the properties of the administrators group, dial in tab, and there we go. These functions are now available, what was not available before. I can now create or grant or deny access based on the remote access policy to this particular user. So these are some examples of features that become available once you switch the mode to the native mode. Also, please remember, you're switching the mode of the domain. All right. So in other words, you can go to any domain controller and switch the mode. You do not have to go to each domain controller to perform this activity. Let's verify that. Let's make a connection to DC2. And on DC2, I'm going to start Active Directory Users and Computers as well. So let's do that. Active Directory Users and Computers. And when I perform the same activity over here, meaning right-clicking on benandbrady.com, going to the properties, I should find, or I should expect to find the same thing. Now, the reason you're not seeing this is because the replication of the domain has not taken place yet. So guess what? Let's try to replicate it right now and make sure that all domain controllers are talking the same language. So to do that, I'm going to go to Start, Programs, Admin Tools, and then Active Directory, Sites and Services, and let's replicate our domain. Okay, so I'm going to expand this. Expand California, servers, okay, DC1. So what I'm going to say is that replicate from DC2 to DC1 and then from DC1 to DC2. So let's do that. I'm going to select this, right click, replicate now. So I've replicated from DC2 to DC1, and let's do this as well, from DC1 to, okay, we have successfully done our replication. Let's check it out right now. So this would be this was a good example of if something has not been updated, you'll be able to see firsthand that it is now updated. So let's verify that. Let's go back to Active Directory Users and Computers, and this time when I right click on this and then go to Properties, I should be able to see that I'm in the native mode. So let's verify that. Oops, I missed that. Let's do it again. Properties, and then here we are in the native mode. Okay, so the replication had not taken place. Once you push the replication, everything looks okay on both domain controllers. And this is one of the reasons why you need to replicate your domain from time to time so that all the domain controllers has the same information about Active Directory. In fact, if you remember, we had created a script also in one of our videos. Here we go. That's a domain replication, a batch file that we created. So from time to time, double click on this so that all the domain controllers have replicated to each other. So that was the discussion on our domain modes. There are two modes, mixed mode and native mode, and now we have successfully upgraded our domain from the 2000 mixed mode to the 2000 native mode. Now, there is another topic that we need to discuss in this particular video known as the single flexible master operations role. It's a long word. It is simply called the FSMO role. Now, let me explain to you what these roles are. When in other videos in Active Directory, or in this particular video also, you may have observed that I have said several times that DC1, DC2, and DC3 participate in what is known as a multi-master replication model. What this means is the following. All domain controllers in Windows 2000 domains are read-write copies of the Active Directory. In other words, I can walk up to DC3 and create a new user, and that user is actually being written on DC3. If I walk up to DC2 and create a group, it is being written on DC2. And then later on, through multi-master replication, meaning that all of these are read-write copies, all of these are masters, replication takes place in such a way so that whatever is new on DC2 goes on to DC1 and DC3 and so forth, so that all the domain controllers have the same information in the Active Directory. Unlike in Windows NT, where the PDC was the master copy, BDCs just had a backup copy, and whenever you created a record, it actually was created on the PDC, and then the BDC got all the records. So in order to have a complex model like this, what Microsoft did was the following. Even though they made all the domain controllers peers of each other, they are actually not equals. There are certain roles that certain domain controllers have, and there are certain roles that other domain controllers do not have. What we need to investigate is what these roles are, who has these roles, and then how can you change these roles from one domain controllers to another. So in other words, what we're trying to say is that these domain controllers are not quite equals of each other. One of them is stronger than the others. Let's find out which the domain controller is and how we can spread out these roles to other domain controllers so that we have some balancing in our network. So let's have a discussion on that. There are 5 roles in this domain, in the operations master. 2 of them are what is known as forest-wide roles, and 3 of them are what are known as domain-wide roles. So to begin with, let's discuss the 2 forest-wide roles. Once again, there are 5 roles. 2 of them are forest-wide. What I mean by forest-wide is that in the entire forest, I can have only one role known as a schema master and only one role known as a domain naming master in the entire forest. In our case, benandbrady.com is a domain, and also there is just one forest, benandbrady.com. In the entire forest, I can have only one DC or one domain controller that has a role called schema master, and just one domain controller that has a role domain naming master. So let's first determine what these roles are and how do we determine who has these roles. So let's first talk about the schema master role. The schema is the definition of objects in the Active Directory. In other words, every time you go to a user account and go to the properties of the user account, or any other Active Directory object for that matter, when you look at the properties, you see certain attributes such as first name, last name, logon name, department, telephone number, and so forth. That is the definition of that particular object known as user, and that is done in what is known as a schema. The schema is the one that actually holds all the definitions of these objects. Now, when you modify the schema for the Active Directory, you're modifying the schema for the entire forest. In other words, if you change the schema, let's say that you're a company that actually sells shoes, and during Christmas time, you would like to give shoes to employees as gifts. So what you would like to do is track the employee's shoe size. Well, if you would like to do that, what you need to do is make a change to the schema. You actually have to go to the schema, define a new object in the X500 Active Directory language, and then that particular, in other words, you're modifying the property so that from now on, every time you go to the user's properties, you'll see a new field known as shoe size, and then you can start tracking shoes. Well, to modify the schema, you must have the domain controller that is holding the schema master role available. All right, so chances are that you do not modify the schema on a regular basis, and none of the companies do. But when you do modify the schema, you must make sure that the domain controller that has the schema master role is available. Otherwise, you will be unable to modify the schema. And also, to modify the schema, you must have the membership of at least the schema admin or the enterprise admin. The reason why you have to be either the schema admin or the enterprise admin is because by being the enterprise admin, you are the administrator of all the domains in a forest, and modifying the schema means that you're actually changing the attributes of all the users in the entire forest. So you better have that role. If you have the schema admin roles, that means that you have been specifically assigned the permission to actually grant or make schema changes, hence that role is important. Let me give some other examples of how schema is modified. Typically, users don't go in and modify the schema. You can if you want to and if you know the X509 programming. However, most Active Directory integrated applications modify the schema. An example of such an application is Microsoft Exchange. When you install Exchange, it integrates with the Active Directory so that when you go to the user properties or when you're trying to create a new user, not only are you creating a new user, you're also creating a user mailbox and email address at the same time. In other words, what Exchange does is it adds additional tabs to the user's properties and thereby modifies the schema. So when you're installing Exchange, the following should happen. You should be at least an enterprise admin or a schema admin, and you should have the domain controller that has the schema master role available. Otherwise, you will not be able to install Exchange. If you're not, in other words, for daily operations, the schema is actually not needed because you're not modifying the schema. And then even if the schema master role is not available, you will not feel the absence of it. So let me show you where this role is and how do you actually check for the availability of this role. To do this, what we need to do is the following. What I'm going to do is go to our domain controller, which is DC1, and over here what I'm going to do is run what is known as the administrative tools or adminpack.msi. What this does is installs and registers additional tools that are not present to me, and one of the tools that it's going to register is, I'm going to just say install all of the admin tools. One of the tools that registers with the Active Directory is the schema admin tool, and only after you run this you will see that several of these tools are running, and one of them is schema DLL that will actually register the schema to this Active Directory. There we go, schema management or MSC. If you do not run this tool, what will happen is that when you go to create a new Microsoft Management Console, you will not be able to actually add the schema snap-in. So you have to run this tool to be able to actually register this. In fact, this is one of the most important tools that is run when you do admin pack on MSI. So once again, this tool is not installed by default, and even after you run this tool, because this is an important part of the Active Directory, don't expect to find a tool in the admin tools created for you to modify the schema. So I've done running this. So what you actually need to do is create a new Microsoft Management Console. So I'm going to do that. Okay, and let's maximize this. And now we're going to add a new snap-in. So what I'm going to do is click on console, add remove snap-in, and then click on the add button. And now here's the snap-in that I need. Once again, please note that this snap-in will not be available unless you run the adminpack.msi tool from the run button over there. I'm going to close this and then close the screen as well, and I've successfully added the Active Directory schema snap-in. And now over here what we will do is expand this, select this, right click, and then over here click on Operations Master, and you will see that DC1 is the schema master for the benandbrady.com domain. So this is how you determine who the schema master is. In our case, DC1 is a schema master, and let me explain to you why. Let's look at our network diagram one more time. Remember, you must have one and only one schema master at any time in the domain. So when DC1 was installed, that was the first domain controller that actually created the forest. So what happened was that DC1, being the only domain controller in the forest, got this role known as the schema master role. In fact, you will notice that DC1 got all the roles as we discussed, and then we'll transfer these roles to some of these other domain controllers. So being the first domain controller in the entire forest, DC1 got the role of the schema master. So I'm going to take an exit from here and then go back to our domain controller, which is DC1. And we observe that DC1 is the schema master. So let's close this, and I won't save this because I won't be using this console anymore. Going back to our notes, the second role is the domain naming master. Once again, you can only have one and exactly one domain naming master in the entire forest. What I call a domain naming master is the registrar of the entire forest. In other words, anytime you add a new domain, a domain naming master role must be available that will make sure that the name is added properly to the Active Directory. In other words, every time you're creating a child domain or adding additional domain controllers or creating a new tree, then the domain naming master role must be available. To observe that DC1 got the domain naming master role, what we need to do is go back to Active Directory. Let's minimize this. We need to go back to Active Directory domains and trusts, and then from there you can verify that DC1 got that role. So let's go to Active Directory. As you can see, more tools were added, so my screen is a little bit different over here. Domains and trusts, and in here I'm going to right click on a domain, go to properties, and this is where you change the mode from mixed to native. Actually, I'm going to cancel out of over here. You will notice that there is some inconsistency as to where you click in Active Directory to observe certain things. Actually, what I did was I clicked on benandbrady.com, which is a domain. All right, and the role that we're talking about is a forest role. So what you should actually do is click one level up and then go and say operations master. So you'll be able to see that the domain naming master role, here we go, the domain naming operations master is currently assigned to benandbrady.com. How do we change these roles? We're going to talk about it later in this video. Okay, but currently we're just observing who has what role. So those were the two, I'm going to close this tool. Those were the two forest wide role in the domain, schema master and domain naming master. Like I said, there are 5 roles. The other 3 roles are domain wide roles. In other words, you got to have these 3 domain controllers, these 3 roles on at least one domain controller in the entire domain. In other words, if you have one domain controller in the entire domain can be a RID master, only one can be a PDC emulator, and the other one can only be an infrastructure master. Of course, all these 3 roles can be on one domain controller as well. In fact, our domain controller DC1 got all these roles. So let's talk about each one in detail. The first one is what is known as the RID master, or the relative ID master. This is the domain controller that is responsible for assigning SIDs, or security identifiers, to different objects in the Active Directory. When you create a new user object such as John, the word John is an English name for us. The way Active Directory tracks it is by issuing it a security identifier known as a SID. This SID must be unique in the entire domain. In order to make sure that this is unique, there is a server known as the RID master that actually tracks these SIDs and knows exactly who has what SID. Now, going back to our Active Directory diagram over here, we know that we can actually create a new user on any of these domain controllers. So what happens is the following. In our case, DC1 happens to be the RID master. What this will do is assign a group of security identifiers to DC2 and DC3. So DC2 and DC3 will have a bank of security identifiers. As users and groups and other Active Directory objects are being created on DC2 and DC3, those SIDs are being used. And once DC2 and DC3 run low on SIDs, they actually contact DC1 and say that, you know what, can you give me some more SIDs because I'm running low on this? And then DC1 will then give more SIDs to DC2 and DC3 and keep track of what SIDs has been assigned to which domain controller, so that when a user is created, it knows exactly that this particular user has a certain SID, and then it was created on either DC2 or DC3. And this also makes sure that it is unique. The best analogy I can give you over here is that if you go to a super department store, then you have a head cashier and then you have different cashiers in aisles. So the head cashier will go from time to time and give a change box to the other cashiers in the aisle so that they have enough change on hand, so that in case a customer would like to get change, they have enough on hand to give the change to that customer. At the same time, DC1, the head cashier, is tracking how much change was given to DC2 and DC3, and when at the end of the day when they reconcile the cash, they know exactly who got what and how much was assigned to each person. So in this manner, the RID master keeps track of all the SIDs that are assigned in the domain, and one and only one domain controller in the entire domain can be the RID master. So let's observe that role. What I'm going to do is go back to DC1 and then go to our tool, Active Directory Users and Computers. This is the tool that is used to observe all the 3 roles. So what I'm going to do is show you these roles and then go ahead and explain to you these roles. So let's right click on a domain this time, benandbrady.com, and then over here what we need to do is click on this link called Operations Masters, and here are the 3 Operations Master. RID master is DC1. Then I'm going to explain to you the next what is known as the PDC emulator which is DC1 as well, and the infrastructure master, which is DC1 as well. And the reason why DC1 got all the roles is simply because DC1 happens to be the first domain controller of the benandbrady.com domain, hence it got those roles. It happens to be the first domain controller in the entire forest, hence it got all the forest roles as well. The second role is the PDC emulator role, and this is perhaps one of the most important roles in the ones that we discussed. And this is also the role that you will see that you will miss the most if the domain controller that has the PDC emulator is not available. Let me explain to you exactly what this is. The PDC emulator role, as the word suggests, emulates the PDC. So like I discussed before, if you had Windows NT backup domain controllers on DC2 and DC3, in order for them to replicate, they actually have to contact a PDC or a primary domain controller. Where, well, in Windows 2000, there is no such role called the PDC. So what happens is that one of the domain controllers in the Active Directory, in the domain benandbrady.com, emulates or acts like the PDC, and that happens to be DC1. So as far as DC2 and DC3 are concerned, when they're ready to actually get the domain database, they look forward to a PDC, and DC1 acts as a PDC emulator. It looks like a PDC to DC2 and DC3. DC2 and DC3 will then contact the PDC and then get the domain database from it. So as long as you have NT domain controllers, this role PDC plays a major role. PDC emulator rather plays a major role. Otherwise, DC2 and DC3 will not be able to replicate the Active Directory to them. So this is a role that is played by the PDC emulator. Now you would ask that, well, what happens when you have upgraded all the Windows NT backup domain controllers? So in that case, you will no longer need a PDC role. Well, that's not true. You will still need the PDC role, because what the PDC emulator does also is that it is the preferred server to which all the user password changes are replicated immediately. Now let me explain to you how that takes place. So going back to our diagram over here, once again, these topics are very theoretical. At the same time, they help you tremendously in troubleshooting. Let's take an example where on DC2 you have actually changed the password of a user called Jill. So Jill's the password is changed on DC2. Replication has not yet taken place on DC3. So let's say Jill happens to be a user in the North Carolina OU over here, and she logs on. And by default, what will happen is that she will connect to DC3 because that's the domain controller in her site. Now, DC3 will observe that, well, the username for Jill and the password does not match, simply because DC3 is unaware that the password just got changed on DC2. So what DC3 will do is the following. Instead of rejecting her from logging in, DC3 will actually contact the PDC emulator of the domain, which happens to be DC1 in this case. So DC3 will contact DC1 and ask DC1, do you know of any changes to this person's username and password before I reject this user from logging in? And DC1 will know that change. The reason for that is because every time a user password changes on any domain controllers, that change is immediately replicated to the PDC emulator. So it does not wait for the next replication schedule. It is replicated immediately to the PDC emulator of that domain. So DC1 knew of the change, and DC1 will inform DC3 that, yeah, you know, I know that you received the replication yet. Go ahead, this username and password is good, log in. Next time when you replicate, you'll get this new information from me. So in this manner, DC3 is able to log in the user Jill, even though that change was not replicated over here. This is important because in a large network with literally tens or hundreds of domain controllers, sometimes when you change users' passwords, it is annoying because the user cannot log in even though the password has changed, and the administrator may think that, well, maybe the change did not take place properly, and they may change it to a different password simply because you have a password policy that does not allow you to repeat passwords. In other words, it would be a guesswork as to when can a user log in and when they cannot log in. So simply tell a user to wait a little while and then log in, and then all the logins would work fine in the domain. So that is the other role that is played by the PDC emulator, meaning that it is the preferred server to which all the password changes are replicated immediately. Last but not the least is the infrastructure master role. This is the one that maintains the group to user references whenever members of the groups are renamed or changed. So in other words, this is the one that makes sure that if you change the user's login name or the user's first name, and the user already belongs to certain groups, it will make sure that the group membership and the user membership are still valid, so that just the changing of the user name does not change the membership in the group. In other words, it maintains all the user to group relationships in the domain. So that is why you need the infrastructure master role. Now, going back to our domain controller 1, you saw that all the three roles can be seen by simply right-clicking on the domain and going to the properties of that domain. I'm sorry, you right click on a domain and then you select the operations master, and then you can see the 3 roles. Now that does not mean that you must keep the roles on these domain controllers. You can actually change it. You can change it in 2 ways. You can willingly transfer it from one domain controller to another, or you can actually seize it from one domain controller simply because the domain controller is unavailable. So let me show you how to do that. So in other words, what we're going to do next is we're going to change these roles from one domain controller to another. As an example, what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to give the role, the read master role, and I'm going to assign it from DC1 to DC2. So what I have to do is actually close this and either go to DC2, or from here I'm going to show you this method. Right click on this and say connect to domain controller, and I'm going to pick up the domain controller DC2. So what I'm actually doing is looking at the Active Directory from DC2's perspective. Of course, I could have easily changed it too. But just to show you a different way of working, what you've done is you're looking at the Active Directory from DC2's perspective. This is equivalent to you actually being on DC2 and then looking at the Active Directory by running the tool Active Directory users and computers on DC2. Now what I'm going to do is select the domain once again, right click and then select Operations Master. And now I'm going to take this role called the read master and click on change. Now it will change from DC1 to DC2 as it says right over here. So simply click on the change button, and it wants to know whether I'm sure if I want to transfer this role. I'm going to say yes, and then it says that the operations master role was successfully transferred. So what I've done is successfully transferred the role of the read master from DC1 to DC2, and you can see the change right over here. Once again, you do not have to do this on every domain controller. In fact, let's right click and connect back to, I'm going to say connect to domain controller, connect back to DC1, and DC1 should have the same information as well. So let's verify that. Now I'm on DC1 and I'm using this tool on DC1. So right click and click on Operations Master. Read Master is now DC2. Of course, you can change it back if you want to. So that's one way of transferring these roles. This is known as a transfer method simply because both domain controllers DC1 and DC2 were available, and you did it with the cooperation of the domain controller that had this current role. In other words, if DC1 were unavailable and you're trying to take away this role, you cannot do it using the transfer method. In that case, you have to use what is known as the seize operations role. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's go back to our notes over here. Going back, there are 2 different ways of transferring these roles or changing these roles. One is known as the transfer operations master role. This can be done as long as the domain controller that has the current role is actually available. If the domain controller is not available, then you have to do what is known as a seize operation. And the seize operation is a drastic step that you take if you're sure that this particular domain controller will never ever come up again. In other words, let's say that you have some hardware failure on DC2 at this point, and you would like to get the role back from DC2 to DC1. You cannot perform the change operation simply because DC2 is unavailable. So what you need to do is take the drastic operation of actually performing what is known as seize, and then take away the role from DC2 and give it back to DC1. To do this, you need to use a utility called the NTDS utility. So I'm going to perform that right over here for you, so that in case you ever are in this situation, you know exactly how to get this role back. So what I've done is made the connection to DC2, and what we're going to do is simulate the fact that DC2 is unavailable by actually shutting it down. So let's assume that there is some hardware failure. I'm going to lose the connection over here on DC2. There is some hardware failure in DC2, and DC2 is no longer available. So we have actually shut down domain controller 2. Now what we need to do is get back a role known as the read master role. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is minimize this and then go to DC1, and let's go to the command prompt. This particular activity has to be performed from the command prompt. So I'm going to type CMD over here, and let me just reposition our screen over here. I'm going to clear the screen and then take you to the root of the drive. There we go, much better. Now we're going to perform the seize operation. We're going to seize the role of the read master from DC2 to DC1. The command for that is ntds util, and then I hit the enter button over here. So I'm in the special mode for the NTDS utility. Now over here, this utility does several things. So we're going to say that what we would like to do is maintain the roles. I'm going to type the word roles over here and hit enter. So now it says that I'm in the FSMO maintenance. Now I'm going to type the next word, connections. I'm going to explain to you exactly why we're doing all this, and then hit enter. So it's asking me what server connection do I like to activate. Over here, I'm going to type the word connect to server, which is a command, and then give the full name for the server, which is dc1.benandbrady.com, and then hit enter over here. There we go. We have successfully connected to dc1.benandbrady.com. Let me explain to you exactly what happened so far. The command is ntds utility. This utility does several things. What we would like to do is maintain our roles. So we type the keyword over here, roles, and that took us to the FSMO maintenance. Now in the FSMO maintenance, it wants to know that tell me which domain controller would you like to connect to. This is the domain controller to which you will actually be seizing the role and giving it to that particular domain controller. Remember when we did this, the transfer operation in the graphical tool as well, we had to first right click on a domain, benandbrady.com, and then say connect to domain controller, and we actually selected DC2. We are doing the same thing over here. In the command prompt, we are saying connect to server, and I would like to connect it to the server DC1, so that once the seize operation is done, we have indicated to server 2000 that DC1 is the one that's actually getting that role. So now we are in the prompt over here called server connections. And now that I've made my connection, I need to type the keyword over here, quit. Please make a note of this. This is sometimes confusing because quit means that you're actually getting out of the whole thing. By typing quit, you're actually, what you're doing is that you have already made the connection to the server, and you're quitting that particular component, and you're back in the FSMO maintenance. So this is a keyword most often forgotten when you do an activity such as this. Now we're going to tell it that, well, in the FSMO maintenance mode, I need to seize, so the keyword over here is seize, the read master. Okay, that's all you got to type. Seize read master, and then I'm going to hit the enter button now. It's letting me know that you're actually transferring it, this role, and I'm going to take it away from the this read master role and give it to you. Is that okay? And I'm going to click on the yes button over here. Now it's going to actually perform a safe transfer of this role. Once again, remember, DC2 is unavailable. So what it is doing is, whatever component should have been on DC2, it's actually trying to recreate that and put it on this particular server, so that this server, DC1, also has a read master role. You attempt to do the seize operation only if you're 100% sure that DC2 will never ever come up. If it does come up, then you should never ever do this, and then just wait, just try to fix DC2 when it comes up. The role will be there. If you want at that time, take the role away from it. So it's trying to do the activity now. It says that it's going to take a few minutes. Once it is done, you will notice that our role is now back to DC1. So let's verify that. I think it's done at this point. It is done seizing it. And now, actually, if you read this, it says clearly over here that DC1 now has 5 roles. One of the roles that it got back was the read master role. So let's verify that. I'm going to type over here quit, and then type quit over here as well to get back to our prompt. And now I'm going to exit out of the command prompt. And let's verify whether or not DC1 got the role back. So let's go to Active Directory one more time. Active Directory uses in computers, and this time when I right click on benandbrady.com and check out the operations master, the read master role is now back on DC1. Okay, now you should make sure that DC2 never comes online, because there'll be some confusion. Remember, you did this simply because DC2 was not supposed to come online, simply because it is not fixable anymore. So make sure that DC2 does not come online. Otherwise, DC2, when it comes online, it does not know that it was kicked out of that role, and the other server has that role, and it will try to do its job, and there will be some confusion in the domain. So you should avoid that at all costs. That should also conclude this topic. In this particular video, what we did was the following. I showed you that there are 2 types of domain modes, Windows 2000 mixed mode and the Windows 2000 native mode, and I showed you the differences between the two and how you upgrade from mixed to native. Remember, you need to upgrade only after the last domain controller has been upgraded from Windows NT to Windows 2000. And by upgrading the mode to native, you had some other features available in Windows 2000 domains that you did not have before. Then we talked about the 5 roles, also known as the FSMO roles. There are 2 forest-wide roles, and these forest-wide roles are called the schema master role and the domain naming master. In other words, in the entire forest, you can have one domain controller that has this role as well as this role. And then I showed you some examples of what the schema master role is and how will you notice the absence of the schema master role. Please remember that schema master is essential if you're installing an application such as Exchange. The domain naming master was the registrar of the domain. Every time you're adding a domain, you have to make sure that it is available. Then there were 3 forest-wide roles. The first one is known as the read master, which basically keeps tracks of SIDs. The PDC emulator is the one that looks like a PDC to NT-BDCs and is also the preferred server for password changes. And the last one that we talked about was the infrastructure master. This is the one that maintains the user to group relationships in domains. So those were the 5 roles. And I try to give you a practical idea as to how to use these roles and how to spread them out. There are 2 ways of actually spreading it out. One is a transfer method, where you're doing it willingly with the availability of the domain controller that currently has that role. And if that is not available, then you have to take the drastic action of seizing the operation master by using the NTDS utility. I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in a different video in Active Directory.